General Hospital will reveal Soliski stood at a dead end, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized the gravity of his situation. Time and time again. He had tried to slip away from Sonny and Jason's relentless pursuit, but this time was different. No matter how hard he tried, there was no escape. His mind raced, searching for a way out. But every path led to the same conclusion: death was inevitable unless he made a choice. His body was shaking, not from fear of the physical pain that might come, but from the cold realization that his life had reached its breaking point. He had been involved in too many shady dealings, witnessed too many lives lost in the underworld. And now he was about to be another casualty of the dangerous game he had chosen to play. There was no more room for denial. Soliski knew that if he didn't act quickly and strategically, he would be silenced forever. His thoughts turned to the cold, unforgiving stare of Sonny, who had him cornered in his apartment in Toronto. There was no escape. The door was locked. And Sonny was not one to show mercy. Sonny, driven by his need for control and answers, stood there with an unwavering gaze. The weight of his years in the criminal world evident in the cold fury that emanated from him. The air in the room was thick with tension as Sonny's voice cut through the silence. He had no intention of letting Soliski go until he got the truth. Jason stood at his side, equally stoic, his eyes focused on the man before them, waiting for him to speak. They both knew that this moment could change everything, but they weren't about to let him off the hook so easily. If Soliski refused to cooperate, he would die in that very apartment. And they would move on to the next lead. Soliski's mind was racing. He knew he had one chance to save himself, but it required a level of trust he hadn't been prepared to extend. He had been a hired gun, following orders without asking too many questions, but now it was clear that the person pulling the strings was someone far more dangerous than he could have imagined. He wasn't just a pawn in this deadly game, he was a piece of a larger puzzle, and the pieces were finally starting to come together. If he was going to survive, he had to make a deal. And it had to be one that Sonny couldn't refuse. With a deep breath, Soliski turned to face Sonny. He had no other choice. The end was near if he didn't act, and his survival instinct kicked in. "I'll tell you everything," Soliski said, his voice low but steady, "but you have to promise me something. You have to make it look like I'm dead. Give me a chance to make things right. Let me have this one final chance to redeem myself. I'll tell you who's behind all this. I'll give you the name you need." Sonny's expression didn't change. But there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he processed Soliski's words. The deal was strange, but it was his only shot. Soliski paused for a moment before continuing, "It's Brennan. He's the one who hired me. He's the one who's been pulling the strings all along." Sonny's eyes narrowed as he took in the revelation. Brennan. The name hung in the air like a heavy weight. It was a name Sonny had heard before, but never in this context. He had always suspected there was someone else behind the curtain, but to hear it from Soliski's lips made it all the more real. Brennan was the one orchestrating the attacks, the one who had been trying to bring Sonny down. Sonny took a moment to process the information, then turned to Jason, who nodded in agreement. They both knew that this was the break they had been waiting for. The pieces were finally falling into place. They had their target, but there was still the matter of Soliski's deal. Sonny had always been a man of his word, and he wasn't about to break a promise, especially when it came to someone who had information as valuable as this. Sonny's decision was cold and calculated. "All right," he said, his voice unwavering, "I'll make it look like you're dead. But don't think for a second that this means I'm letting you off the hook. We'll deal with Brennan. You've given me what I need, and now it's time to make him pay." Soliski let out a sigh of relief, the tension easing from his body. He had been granted a reprieve, a second chance at life. But he knew the price would come later. With the deal struck, Sonny and Jason set their plan into motion. Soliski would disappear, and Brennan would believe he had won. But in reality, It was just the beginning of the end for him. The tables were about to turn, and Soliski knew that his survival was only temporary. In the dangerous world they inhabited, loyalty was as fragile as glass, and one wrong move could shatter everything. As Sonny and Jason left the apartment, they knew they had to move quickly. Brennan was still out there. And he wouldn't be safe for long. Soliski had been given a chance to survive, but at what cost? The next chapter of this deadly game was just beginning. And as Sonny and Jason prepared to take down Brennan, they knew that no one, not even Soliski, was safe. Sonny stood motionless for a moment, the weight of Soliski's words hanging heavily in the air. The silence between them seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Sonny's mind was working quickly, processing the gravity of what had just been revealed. Soliski. The man who had been behind the brutal attack on his home, the very man who had been sent to end his life, was now offering him the answers he so desperately needed. But there was a catch. Soliski was asking for a second chance, a way out of the deadly web he had woven around himself. Sonny had never been one to show mercy, but the gravity of the situation. The fact that Soliski was willing to betray his employer, gave Sonny pause. For a fleeting moment, Sonny considered the possibility that this might be a trick, some last-ditch effort to save his own skin. But as he looked into Soliski's eyes, he saw a man who had run out of options. The desperation was clear. There was no escape for Soliski now, not from Sonny's wrath, nor from the powerful forces behind the scenes. Sonny knew that this revelation could change everything. He had long suspected that there was someone more dangerous pulling the strings, but to hear it confirmed in such a direct manner was unsettling. Jason, ever vigilant by Sonny's side, noticed the slight shift in Sonny's expression. It was subtle, but Jason could tell that Sonny was weighing the consequences of accepting Soliski's deal. Jason had seen Sonny make hard decisions before, but this one was different. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about strategy, revenge, and ultimately, control. Breaking the silence. Sonny slowly nodded, his eyes still locked on Soliski. "All right," he said, his voice low and cold, the weight of his words final. "You've got your deal." Soliski didn't waste a moment. He knew this was his one shot, and if he didn't make it count, he wouldn't have the luxury of a second chance. "Brennan," Soliski repeated, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. As if the name itself carried the weight of death. "It was Brennan who ordered everything. He's the one who hired me to take you down." Sonny's heart skipped a beat. Brennan. The name sent a chill through the room, a sense of realization dawning on him. For years, Sonny had been facing threats from all angles, rival families, new enemies, and old betrayals. But Brennan was a name Sonny had never fully considered, a shadow lurking just outside his view. Now, that shadow was cast in full. And it was clear that Brennan had been orchestrating the chaos all along. Jason's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as the revelation sank in. "Brennan," he muttered under his breath. Processing the name, thinking of the implications. Brennan was not just some random adversary, he was a force to be reckoned with, someone far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. This was no longer just about Soliski. This was about a man who had carefully plotted to take down Sonny, someone who had been playing a much deeper game. Sonny exhaled sharply, his thoughts spinning. He had trusted certain people, relied on certain alliances, and yet here was a new enemy, someone hidden in the shadows, manipulating everything from behind the scenes. The more Sonny thought about it, the more his anger grew. He could almost feel the searing rage building inside him. Brennan had crossed a line. Not only had he put Sonny's life in danger, but he had also done so by using people like Soliski, people who were disposable in his eyes. For a moment, Sonny didn't speak. He just stood there, his mind calculating the next move. It wasn't enough to just take down Brennan. No, Brennan had to be made to suffer, to pay for every treacherous move he had made against Sonny and his family. Sonny's mind raced with possibilities, each more ruthless than the last. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not when everything was finally coming into focus. Jason, sensing Sonny's thoughts, spoke up. His voice calm but tinged with determination. "We can't let him slip away. Brennan is the key to everything. If we take him down, everything else falls into place." Sonny's eyes met Jason's. And without a word, he knew they were on the same page. The plan had already begun forming in his mind, a strategy to lure Brennan out. To force him into the open where Sonny could make him pay for everything. Soliski, for his part, was no longer a player in this game. He had given up the name, and now, his fate was sealed. Sonny had promised him a second chance, but that didn't mean he would be allowed to walk away unscathed. There was no room for forgiveness in Sonny's world, not when betrayal was involved. Soliski would be given a chance to live, but he would live knowing that his days were numbered. Sonny turned away from Soliski, signaling to Jason that it was time to move. "Get him out of here," Sonny instructed, his voice cold and final. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed Soliski by the arm, leading him toward the door. As Soliski was escorted out of the apartment, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the deal he had just made. He had bought himself a little more time, but time in Sonny's world was a fragile thing. Sonny stood in the apartment, staring out the window, his mind already on the next phase of his plan. He had learned what he needed to know, but the real work was just beginning. Brennan wouldn't be allowed to slip away into the shadows anymore. He had made a grave mistake by underestimating Sonny. And now, Sonny was going to make him pay in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. The game had changed. The pieces had shifted. And Sonny knew that no one, especially Brennan, was safe anymore. With the information Soliski provided, Sonny made the decision to spare his life, but that was just the beginning of his plan. It was a calculated move, one that would lead to something much bigger. Sonny and Jason wasted no time, immediately beginning to formulate a strategy to ensure that Brennan would pay the price for everything he had orchestrated. They were determined to make sure Brennan would not slip away into the shadows, to ensure he would not escape the consequences of his actions. The forces behind the scenes who had been pulling the strings were no longer going to remain hidden, they would face justice. Soliski had given them a crucial lead. One that set the wheels in motion for what was to come. Yet, despite the critical nature of this new information, Sonny couldn't shake a lingering feeling of confusion and unease. He was a man who prided himself on understanding his enemies, on knowing why they did what they did. But in Brennan's case, Sonny couldn't make sense of it. There was no obvious reason for Brennan's animosity toward him. Sonny knew the rules of the game. He understood betrayal and manipulation better than anyone. But what didn't sit right with him was that Brennan had no personal grudge against him. They weren't rivals from opposing families, they hadn't fought over territory. Nor did they share a past filled with betrayal or hatred. So why would Brennan go so far as to try to have him killed? Sonny's mind kept turning over the pieces, trying to connect the dots. But there was something about Brennan's involvement in the attack on Sonny that didn't add up. It wasn't just the attempt on Sonny's life that troubled him. The attack had led to Michael being severely burned, and Sonny couldn't understand why Brennan would go to such lengths, harming innocent people, just to bring him down. Michael wasn't a part of their world, not in the way that Sonny and his enemies were. He was an innocent bystander, someone who should never have been dragged into this dangerous game. Sonny's blood boiled at the thought of his son suffering because of a man like Brennan, and the more he thought about it, the more determined he became to ensure Brennan would pay for every last ounce of damage he had caused. But it wasn't just Brennan who worried Sonny. There was something more. Something that lingered in the background of the entire situation. Despite everything they had learned, there was still an unknown factor. Brennan wasn't working alone. And there was a shadowy figure behind him, someone whose motives were still a mystery. Sonny's mind raced with the possibilities. Who was this person? What was their connection to Brennan? And how far would this shadowy figure go to ensure that their plan succeeded? Sonny knew that they were only scratching the surface of something far more dangerous. Brennan was just the tip of the iceberg, and the true mastermind behind the attack on him and his family had yet to be revealed. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not when there were still so many unanswered questions. There was a bigger game at play, and Sonny knew that the stakes were higher than ever. As Sonny and Jason began putting their plan into motion, their focus remained on one goal, to make Brennan pay. But Sonny's mind kept drifting back to the larger mystery, to the questions about why Brennan had targeted him in the first place. And who was behind it all? It wasn't enough to just bring Brennan down, they had to find the one pulling the strings, the one who had set this entire plan in motion. Only then would they be able to bring the full weight of justice down on their enemies. The investigation had only just begun, but Sonny's determination had never been stronger. The past may have been full of bloodshed and betrayal, but Sonny was prepared to face whatever came next. With Brennan's name in hand and the shadowy figure still out there, the battle was far from over. The war was only beginning, and Sonny was ready to fight, no matter who or what stood in his way. Now, as the forces prepared to face off, every plan that Sonny and Jason had been formulating was focused on one singular goal, to make Brennan face the consequences he deserved. Even though it was a small victory, this was an important step to end the long days of living in fear and scheming.